It is 5 o'clock. We will call this policy work session to order. Welcome. This is a special meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. The purpose of this meeting is a work session on policy with Ms. Pam Howley. We're going to go to roll call. At this time, the board will take roll for attendance. I will call each board member's name. If they're present, they'll say present. Director Farah is out this evening. Director Clark. Present. Director Hamada. Present. Vice President Margell. Present. And I'm here supposedly. So we'll go to 2.01. I'm going to call on Deputy Superintendent Dr. Behringer for introductions and to continue our work for today.
Great. Thanks, President Meno. Happy to have you guys here this evening. Follow our policy work. And I'd like to introduce Ms. Pam Hawley, Policy Coordinator, to begin the policy review this evening.
Good evening, President Benno, members of the board, Deputy Superintendent Behringer, Ms. Curry, and Team KSD. I will, as normal, flip through the policy work session PowerPoint. You have a copy in front of you. I just want to touch on a few things. Again, we're focusing on essentials. We do have other than essential in the group tonight, but we are focusing on essentials. Policy and procedure, we talk about this every time. Our first one will be 5161, Civility in the Workplace, first reading. 2090, Program Evaluation, also first reading. 3520, Student Fees, Fines, and Charges, first reading. 6210, Purchasing and Contracting, Authorization and Control, first reading. 6220, Bid or Request for Proposal Requirements, first reading. 6550, Capitalization Threshold for Leases and SBITAs, first reading. 6605, Student Safety Walking, Biking, Riding Buses, and School Patrol. That part is new to the title of the policy, the School Patrol part, first reading. 1830, Participation in School Boards Association, first reading. And Policy 4220, Complaints Concerning Staff or Programs, 10th reading. Whatever goes through will appear on an upcoming regular board meeting, and the next policy work session is Wednesday, November 1st. So let's start. Policy 5161, Civility in the Workplace. I'll pull it up.
Point of privilege, President Bento?
Yep.
Because we have put off this 4220 for the 10th reading, is there any reason we can't start with 4220 tonight?
I mean, it's the will of the board to discuss the agenda, so if people want to bring that forward as the first thing we discuss, I don't see why we can't make a motion to do that.
I so move.
Is there a second? I mean, I'll second it for discussion purposes. Director Hamada, do you want to speak to your motion? It's been moved and seconded.
Well, I mean, if we're going to go ahead and get this through before the end of the year, I mean, at the actual board meeting, I thought we were ready to vote on it, so I don't understand why it would take so long to get that across tonight. That we couldn't get that done and be on with it to put it on the next board meeting.
Do my colleagues have any other discussion? Director Clark.
And I'll take the reverse. The fact is, of course, there was an agreement in terms of the last time we brought it up, and I have reason to believe that there is an agreement now, and to make matters worse, we're short one member.
But we're not voting on anything today. We're just discussing and then if there's a consensus, we'll move it on to our next meeting, which is the
26th, I believe. Is that a Wednesday night?
No, 25th.
25th.
Wait, I'm sorry, that next one, that's when
We would bring it to the next board meeting to vote on if
so
there's
not
a
next
consensus.
week's, it would be the...
It would be the following.
Yeah,
Correct.
the second one of the month.
Yeah. Correct.
And there's only one board meeting in December, and that's pretty much with new officers.
Yeah, and
But there's the
November.
month of November.
November is only one meeting as well.
That's correct.
Yeah. Because of the holidays.
I wonder if I could float something.
After you.
We have people here to speak to the policies that the ones that are at the beginning, I believe will move really rather quickly. Of course, it's up to the board, but
There is a motion on the table. Other discussion? Thank you, Ms. Halley.
No discussion.
No discussion? So let's put it for a vote. All those in favor of moving 4220 as the first item of discussion, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All opposed? Say no.
No.
So it's 2-2, so there, does it pass? So we will move on as scheduled with policy 5161.
okay, let me pull it up here. This version shows the track changes. And what I want to talk about really quickly is that the changes to this policy make it a much more robust and detailed civility in the workplace policy than we had before. The primary purpose of the revision of this policy is to produce a work environment that is safe, civil, and promotes mutual respect. In this policy, as rewritten, mutual respect is mentioned several times. It is basically our value statement defining and promoting civility in the workplace. Quoting WASDA, Policy 5161, Civility in the Workplace, can be immensely helpful in circumstances where staff struggle to get along or to be respectful, but where the behavior does not rise to the level of actual harassment. As the employer, school districts have the legal authority through adoption of board policy to establish a viewpoint-neutral policy of civility. I don't know if you've had a chance to look it through. It is really robust compared to what we had before.
Ms. Holly, can you help me? Because, again, I had trouble. I couldn't even get into SharePoint today. They wouldn't let me in. And I apologize for waiting till today, but I've had a really busy week. But which one are we going, which one on the ones that you sent me, what is the exact title on that so I can hold that in front?
Well,
I have 5161, but there's different versions. I want to know.
so if you look at the one that says proposed, I believe that's how it's titled.
Yeah.
That shows how it is with all the changes made. And let me put it up that way on the screen.
Because it's kind of confusing when I did with, you know, the copies that you sent me. It kind of gets crazy on.
Yeah, there are 4 of everything, so it is confusing.
They didn't load perfectly either when you sent them. So how would I identify this? Because
If you look at the one that's a Word version of this policy, 5161, it'll say update KSD. It's a Word version instead of a PDF,
right, okay.
and that'll show the track changes.
I can't get into SharePoint. That's been the problem. But I have these all here.
They're all in email.
Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to decipher this. If you can just point me to the right one. Okay, which one of these? The Word?
Word document, and it's
That's the only one that's
5161.
the Word document?
Yes.
That would be it.
That'll show the track changes on it.
Where?
This one, the word, 5161?
Okay, that's what I just, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Appreciate that.
Sure.
Show, because it might, it's opening up as a preview, so let's all open it.
Any discussion or questions about 5161?
I did. In here, there was, I'm trying to find where it is. There's a whole section, first in the expectations, it speaks to, I think it's the second to last bulletin, yep, there it is. Address incivility when it's observed. And up above, it says, in support of this policy, the board of director expects its members and stakeholders to. And so then the expectation is to address incivility when it's observed.
Where are you at, Director McGinn?
I am looking under the first set of bullet points where it says expectations of stakeholders, board of directors, employees, parents, volunteers,
bullet
contractors.
And it's up on the screen too, if you want to see it that
Okay,
way.
I've got it in front of me.
And then the second to last bulletin says the expectation is that you address incivility when it's observed. And I guess I have a little bit of an issue with that one in that to put it out there is that it's an expectation to always do it, and not everybody's always comfortable in the situation to have to do it. And that, so if it's, and maybe I guess I'm just having a discussion about this. If I expect somebody to do it and they don't do it, then is then the assumption that everything that was done was civil because you didn't address it, and the expectation is that you do,
Or
then
you-
everything said should have been fine.
Or you violated the policy because you didn't address it.
Exactly. So I guess I have an issue with that when you expect somebody to have to do something in response in the moment, because I think that there is value sometimes in taking a moment, thinking about it, knowing that there's different styles of being able to do things. Maybe addressing something in front of a large group might not be the most positive response, that maybe having a one-off conversation. I just trust adults and students to know sometimes that that's not the right place that they want to do it, and in that moment or whatever. And so I guess I have an issue with that. Anybody else see that, feel that way, or am I in left field on this one?
I mean, I hear what you're saying, so I wonder if there could be reworded in a way like, because also safety may not be safe to intervene, or people may not feel physically or emotionally safe to intervene in a situation when they observe it, or might make them uncomfortable. I wonder if we can address it, something like address incivility when it's observed, if possible, or if you can, or something like that.
There is another whole section down below that talks about addressing uncivil conduct. And so if you're thinking about taking that bullet out or rewording, we would need to look at doing the same with this whole section.
Yeah.
Help me to understand where the definition of civility is.
I think it's actually called out in here.
It's in the middle between the 2 bullet points.
Yep. It has
Okay.
6 bullet points with it.
Okay, thank you. I think I'd agree with you, Director Margell, on that bullet point.
And I guess would that be in support of this policy, the board of director instead of expects, maybe changing the word to encourages its members and stakeholders too? I don't know. Because again, that expect is up above something that there's a lot there. And I don't know. I think that also waters down the whole rest of the language, and I'm not necessarily wanting that.
What does the word address mean? How are we going to, what is our definition of address?
Well,
Because it could be
address,
different.
There's 5 bullet points that explain it.
Right, but I'm saying it can deviate from person to person. So, I mean, do we have to define that too, or? Because somebody may feel they've addressed it and somebody else may feel they haven't. I'm just curious.
Other thoughts? Do we want to make that change? Director Clark?
Well, I'm just in observation, the person who would be intervening would have a policy to stand behind if they choose to intervene. So the question of expectations is to speak to, we're trying to keep things where we can be conversant on difficult things.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with expectation, because the true expectation will be when the intervention takes place, and then whether it's going to be challenged or not. So I don't have a problem with it as an overarching policy.
Anything you want to?
So Anita McPherson, I'm here on behalf of Human Resources, bringing this policy forward. I do think that the WASDA language that was provided collectively speaks to a lot of additional detail that we don't currently have in our policy. And I do think we have an expectation that we expect all people who are on our KSD campuses, including, as it says above, visitors, staff members, to act in a civil way. And as we would want to reinforce good, respectful behaviors on our campuses, it would be an expectation that if somebody was acting uncivilly, that there be a attempt to intervene in that moment. The continued harm that may be done to one or more people as that behavior continues and persists is not what we would want. We would want there to be an attempt to intervene to, as it says here, address the uncivil conduct. And it doesn't mean addressing it is necessarily through a formal method. There's lots of ways in which we attempt to address and intervene around situations at an informal level, to call attention to it, to make sure that people it's being done in a calm and respectful manner. That's what we would want everywhere, right? We want all of our folks on our KSD campuses to be held to that expectation.
I know we moved it to the top, but it's funny to me that we crossed out, the Kent School District believes that a safe, civil, and respectful environment is essential. It just cracks me up. But I know we moved it to the top. But seeing it crossed out just makes me laugh. Sorry, I just have to point that out. That's why I like the strikeout document. It's very fun to me, but I also like words. You have a thought.
Yeah, and I appreciate your thoughts that we do expect people to behave in a civil manner. I do feel like that's a different expectation than expecting somebody to intervene on somebody else's behalf as an expectation. And I don't know. I will end it at that. I think that there's a difference of, I would put it in a different section, other than under expectations. I would say, you know, an encouragement to do it.
Should we work on it a bit and bring it back?
That's my opinion, because again, I also think about, so if somebody doesn't do that and we put it just in the exact same category as all of these other things, right? Refrain from using abusive language. So if somebody uses abusive language and you don't address it, are you just as much at fault as that person who did say something if there's 5 people in a room? And so one person doesn't address it, 4 people do. So then there's that. So then you have that. And then, or, okay, this is already being handled by somebody else. I'm stepping away. There's, you know, there's that issue. And then, so if they're just as much at fault, then what, how does that get dealt with? And then also, if somebody says something and doesn't, it's not addressed, again, it goes back to then, well, then it wasn't uncivil because you never said anything, because the expectation is that you do it. And no, the behavior is the behavior and should be judged on its own, not based off of how somebody addressed it or not, so.
So what is the procedure? Do we have that written for this that goes with it?
We don't at this point.
Because I'd be
I
interested.
mean, we have an old one, correct?
No, actually, 5009, our previous workplace civility policy, does not have a procedure. So it would just be replacing the policy with this policy language.
It kind of has procedures within it,
Yeah, that's what I was,
which is not particularly my favorite. They should be separate, but.
I will note that some of the WASDA policies do present like that.
Yeah.
If you've noticed, if you take the WASDA policy language as is, there are times in which it looks very procedural inside the policy.
Would we write a procedure for this, or would we just leave it like this?
We didn't have any intention of bringing a procedure forward because there are policy language around specific conduct that can be addressed through other, like employee due process, whether it's in the CBA or through our non-rep handbook.
If I'm a normal human that is not aware where those things are, where would I find that? If I Googled and found this policy, where would I find those? Because there's some cross sections, but I don't see other things, right? So I guess the reason why I ask that is because if I don't know what the process is and I go to the policy, I'm like, oh, there's no procedure, so then nothing? Like, or is there something that we can say, this refers to, you should go through the collective bargaining process, you should do this, you should file a complaint with your supervisor, like?
So 4220, which it sounds like you may be discussing tonight, will be it would be a cross-reference policy and procedure here that talks about if you have additional concerns, right, our expectation that you attempt to address them at the lowest level, and then if they are not addressed, what the kind of escalation of that concern may look like.
But if I'm looking at this policy and there's no procedure, how would I know that? I wouldn't know that, right? Unless I go like, oh, look, this crop rotation thing will tell me that. Like, would it? I guess that's why I'm asking why there isn't like procedure to kind of guide people if they need to.
Would the procedure just be an explanation of what it would look like to file a complaint?
I don't know. I generally stay away from procedures since it's not really my realm. But I guess for me, like, if I'm a Joe Q public person and I am looking at policies and I'm like, wow, I just looked at this civility thing, this uncivil action that happened, like, how would I know what to do about that?
Yeah.
I guess is my question.
I actually think it's in here, that it talks about, you know, starting at the lowest level
Yeah.
and then moving up to an administrator. Pretty sure I saw it in here.
But why wouldn't that be procedurally?
Yeah, yeah.
I guess that's just my question.
So
But-
my concern, we may be duplicating 4220 at that point. So the 4220 is the formal process of complaints against employees and programs.
We're well aware.
If I may
Okay.
add, Mr. President?
Yes.
Can I ask about that? Finishing up that would be,
Yeah, 4220, as we propose, would remove employee-on-employee complaints. And so that may be a nuance that shouldn't be overlooked. If you want to process, don't rely on that for those kinds of scenarios.
and also, I mean, if that's the remedy for extending common courtesy, such as saying please and thank you, if somebody forgot their Ps and Qs, I hope 4220s. I mean, that just sounds arduous. I mean, that's not what it's built for. And so I'm hoping that there's other remedies than that. People should say please and thank you. It shouldn't be a 4220 complaint.
Also, really, is it really a policy? Like, I don't know.
Well, the expectation, I'm sorry, I hate, but I mean, that's exactly what the language says. And so I agree, people should extend common courtesy, should say please and thank you. But if that's what the remedy is, that's listed, I would hate that to be what we have.
Where are you seeing that, Megan?
In the expectations, the first set of bullet points
Okay.
on page, my
Yeah,
page numbers aren't
I
right.
got it. What does it say, please and thank you?
Extend common courtesy to others, such as saying please and thank you.
It's almost at the very
Oh,
bottom.
it's at
of
the end.
bullet
Okay, I got it. That's crazy.
But you can see it happening.
Yeah.
It is a logical
Oh,
next
yes.
step, if that's what we have written.
Because we have a lot of people that don't say please and thank you.
No,
They're violating the policy. Well, we don't adopt it yet, but I hear you.
I mean, it's interesting.
I mean, one of the things we brought this forward for was to have more clarity around what a civil and uncivil workplace looks like. That the previous language was more vague, and so this one does include more detail. We're also happy to go back and take a look at the specific details and bring a different draft forward. So I feel like I'm hearing the address incivility when observed is a concern, so we could look at what that looks like or where it's placed in the policy, as well as the extend common courtesy to others, period, instead of saying please and thank you.
That makes sense.
I mean, culturally, could that have any interest that in culture they do things differently, you know, than saying please and thank you? I mean, I'm just looking at from my culture. In other cultures, do they bow or something, and that's their sign of respect and thank you? I mean, are we taking that into consideration, or?
I mean, the language here just says such as, so I think they're providing examples of what common courtesy may be considered.
Willing to take another look at it with your team?
Are there any other bullet points or any other portions of concern? I hear those two. Are there any others you'd like us to take a look at?
I'm just sort of hearing the process for complaining about a violation of that. So we need to clarify, if we make those changes with 4220, there will be some guidance in the policy since we're not going to do a standalone procedure. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess that was kind of my point, was just looking at, so then something in here needs to say, and if you have a concern, file this,
Report to your manager.
report to your manager, file, whatever, here's a link, whatnot. I mean, that would be an additional thing.
Thank you.
So I guess the consensus is to bring it back.
That's
Sounds
what it
like.
sounds like.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just feel like I have to say before we move on, I really do think we should do all of these things. Like, I really do. But I just want to make sure that we're not going to have a mountain of 4220s because the people didn't say thank you at the water fountain, and, right? And that we wouldn't hold somebody accountable because they didn't feel comfortable in the situation of addressing it at the moment.
I agree.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, sorry. I want civility in the workplace. I think it's important. Let's be nice.
Let's move on, please. Sorry.
Thank you,
Sorry.
President Benno.
Sorry, I'm not making jokes, but I mean,
Yeah.
but I agree. But yes, I would, yes. Let's move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, we're on to 2090 program evaluation, a first reading. This policy, it's been more than 20 years. It was last reviewed. Dr. Ashley Birkland, Executive Director of Performance Outcomes, Joelle Bejarano, Director of Strategic Initiatives, and Charity Jensen, Director of Assessment, spent a lot of time reassessing and refining this policy to bring it up to date and making sure the information was accurate. Policy talks about a statement of expectations and standards for the district's instructional programs and evaluation processes. Any questions?
I guess I'm interested in hearing, while we have the people that work so much on this, was the reasoning for assessment moved to evaluation just because assessment kind of connotates like a test as opposed to evaluation, which is more broad? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Joe?
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Dr. Clark.
The very last paragraph in the last sentence, specifically, the district will make adjustments if student performance under the Washington Comprehensive Assessment Program indicates the district students need assistance in identified areas. Now, I'm struggling with whether that is to identify a block of students or just a general overarching view of students not needing assistance.
I think it can be both, depending on what we're evaluating that year and what is part of that instructional program. Are we identifying a certain group, or is it more broad than that? So,
All right, so let's say it's 8th grade literacy, right? Are there standards employed that say there are clearly identified needs that come with that assessment? See, my problem with it is when you're dealing with an extremely diverse group of students, if for some reason Meadowbrook Elementary has lower than normal scores, is there something that would ask the question, was there something unique about that population?
it could be, I think that some of this is going back to what we're evaluating and then its impact back to those scores. So it's hard to say with certainty because there are going to be research questions aligned with the evaluation, and depending on what we're looking at, it could be that it's school specific, it could be that we're looking at a specific population. So it's kind of, it depends.
Okay, so we're covered with this then.
I think we kept this fairly broad to be able to capture those different projects and programs that we're evaluating.
Okay, thank you.
That was going to be my question too, because it obviously is referring to the WASL, which is very old, right? And so I'm always very leery of putting specific names of assessments or whatever, but the Washington Comprehensive Assessment Program is just a general assessment program, correct?
Yeah, it'll capture, like currently it's the SBA and the science assessment, so yeah.
Okay, great. But the WASL, so this hasn't been updated in a minute.
23, 21, 2
Yep.
years,
Yep.
something.
Yep.
Yeah.
I took the WASL.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about the personality test section? I'm sorry, that just seemed out of left field a little bit. And what kept on going to me is, I remember taking, well, Mrs. Werner's class, and it was a psychology class, and we did a fun little personality test and that. Would she need to, like, put that out for parent, like, tell me what that looks like, and is that what it's going for? Is there something else that I'm missing on this one?
Yeah, so Ms. Holly and I had several conversations about this, and it really comes down to some of the legal references that are in this policy and where they are homed, for lack of a better word. So there are the pieces in there about certain test questionnaires, diagnostic personality tests, and that's from the WASDA model kind of capturing that piece, and it's where it's living for now. But it is that there are certain types of assessments where you need to have that, that parental permission before they're done.
Because even like Zello and Pathful and some of those things that we use for CTE or for like a high school and beyond, and Renton, sorry, I don't know what we do here. They ask personality questions about, and that's how they diagnose like what career you should be in. And so like, to me, is that too broad? Would that limit? That's part of a lot of the high school and beyond plans is doing personality tests to find out what career would be most suited for you. So that was one of the other things when I was looking at this, because I teach psychology, and every time I do an assessment like this, I'm like, this is for fun, just to see where you are. It's not diagnose it. I'm not a certified counselor. I can't give you a personality test. And so a lot of it is like for fun. It's like a BuzzFeed quiz, you know, like check it out. So I was just curious about things like the high school and beyond plan, where there is obviously personality assessments built in to that. Would that kind of, or is that part of the plan so it's adopted, or is that something that would still require parental involvement to do assessments like that?
Is it because it's not diagnostic?
I think that's the differentiation there, like diagnostic for like a diagnosis versus you're doing a personality test to uncover something else like that.
Okay, so that's,
We agree that it's in a weird place, but why
but
it's
you
in
can
there.
still do like the, what's that called?
Myers-Briggs?
Yeah, Myers-Briggs. Like you can still do Myers-Briggs in your class, right?
Well, not the official one, because that's diagnostic, but you can do that 16personalities.com for fun.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, when we're on this paragraph,
Is it diagnostic?
do we have a handle on how many parents actually do want to see all this? I noticed there's articles about parents saying they lost all their rights, and this definitely talks about that issue, which is important nationally and statewide. But do we as a district know if we have, customer service? Do we know how many people are complaining or wanting to know about their kids' tests or come up, and do we have any handle on that? I'm just curious.
I don't have that now. I can follow up with our director of
I
assessment.
don't expect you
but-
to know, have it tonight, but if,
Yeah, but I do know from past experience that it would come up like 1 or 2 times a year. A parent might go through that request process and want to see their student's assessment from the state assessment. They see something like, I don't agree with that score. There's a process they can go through and review all of that, and we would have 1 or 2 of those every year. So there's a process, and it happens.
well, doesn't it also say they have the right to opt out of testing? That's what I was more interested in.
Oh, the opting out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can choose not to.
Do you have an idea how many parents do that in our district?
I don't offhand,
Okay,
no.
thank you.
Other questions or feedback?
Sorry, it maybe it's just because it's superintendent or designee. When should we refer parents to the principal first of their school or to the school level as opposed to going to the superintendent first about a test? I guess, am I thinking about that?
Chain of command.
Yes, right? And so
Start at the teacher,
I just thought it was interesting that the first thing we said is go to the superintendent.
Yeah, and some of it, I think, will depend on which assessment it is. Like if we're talking about the SBA or something like that, the principal doesn't have the authority to kind of start that process, so it might be more centrally located versus something that's happening at a school. So I think the designee allows for that flexibility.
Okay.
And it allows the superintendent to push it back to the principal or to the teacher if it is a building-based assessment, but they would have access to that information versus the superintendent on more of a statewide or a federal assessment.
Okay.
So again, if I'm a parent and I'm looking at this policy and I'm like, I have a complaint about it, it says the superintendent will, right? So then, if I'm searching for this, is there a procedure with this, or would I just know I need to email the superintendent?
The procedure is not going to address that piece. There is a process for that we could refer to if that needs to be added in there.
I'm always about transparent, like, I'm just pretending like we all know the process, mostly because we're here, we're in this space. A lot of our families and communities are not aware, so they may not know. That's why I'm asking about it today. I've had some people ask me some questions about policy stuff related to like, how do I, and I mostly know, and a lot of it is, well, there's this form, there's this, here's a policy, or I refer it because I don't know, like actual thing. Because when I look at this sometimes, I don't always know what the actual procedure is. I know what the words are, I know what they mean, but I don't always know what the process is to address it. And I guess that's, to me, missing in this. But like, it's, again, it's a procedure, you wouldn't put it in this, but I would assume there's a procedure attached, but I don't know.
And I think, President Bento, I would agree with that because I think we need to have our policies simple of what's going to happen, or what you can, KISS policy, like if this, if P, then Q, type of thing. That's just what I see, because a lot of our parents really are not savvy on a lot of this. And even sometimes when I'm searching on the website to try to find information, it can be confusing to me, so.
We can add this into the procedure. We're still drafting that. Most of it is centralized on the process for doing program evaluation, but we can add this piece into the procedure.
Do we feel good about moving on?
Yes.
Good, okay.
Ms. Hallie, do you hear consensus? Because I can't call that.
I certainly did from
Okay.
everyone.
Okay, very good.
Head nodding. We're on to 3520, student fees, fines, or charges. We just revised this policy in June. The difference now is based on House Bill 1536, talking about high school diplomas. This came up in another policy that we had earlier about the $1,000, the $1,000 or 5-year rule. So that's the only change to this. If you have questions about it, otherwise that really is the only change. Thank you.
I don't have any questions. So.
Are we good to move it forward? Vice President Ardell?
Yes, I guess there's been chatter that, do we really have to try to collect? And I guess I would just like that addressed. Do we really have to try to collect on like lunch debt?
Isn't there an RCW or WAC that says we have to at least
Yeah.
attempt to
Yeah.
collect? Like, that's part of the law, I think. But I'll hand it over to someone who can answer that.
And I've heard that, but can we actually see that? Can somebody provide that to me? It doesn't have to be this moment, but can I actually read that and see that, so then when I'm answering, yes?
Absolutely,
I hate that we have to, but I have to because of this.
absolutely.
Okay, thank you, I really appreciate that.
Mr. Rarick brought up that in his report,
I just want it because I still continue to get correspondence, and it would just be nice to be like,
Absolutely.
this is my law that I have to,
And he quoted the RCW.
Yeah.
So.
thank you.
Other questions, feedback?
And I will just say on this, somebody told me today about the Surface computers, $1,000 a pop. I mean, that's 1,000 right there. So when you think about the collecting of that, it's, those individual items can really add up. Good to move forward then, everyone? Okay. 6210, purchasing and contracting authorization and control. The changes on this were minor. A sentence was added noting that major capital projects are approved by the board and that the individual capital outlay purchases within that major project do not require additional approval. The dollar amount for board approval for purchase of capital outlay item remains at $25,000. That was not changed. Let me pull it up.
Can I ask about that one? In reviewing, just the other day, we had, I was reviewing what's going to be on our agenda next, and one of them was a $7,000 change order. And so that seems less than 25,000. Is that still necessary? I guess I'm trying to see how those two align. Because the total request is over 25,000?
I'm going to go ahead and let Sarah respond.
Go ahead.
No, I'll respond, I just didn't want to.
So it has been past practice that anytime there is a change order to a major capital project,
Okay.
that the board be notified and allowed to actually review all the details of that change. And so that's why it's actually brought to the board as a consent agenda item. But the board would have the right to change that or increase the limit to align with this policy if wanted or necessary.
And 7,000 is 7,000, and I get that. But I remember when I first started, it was over light bulbs, and it was like $700.
I remember.
We may want to, as a board, think about light bulbs and $700. I don't know, that,
And again, that's why a lot of those live on the consent agenda, so you don't have to spend a lot of time. It's the district being transparent with our practices.
appreciate
So
that.
people can see that we are being good stewards of the money that we said that we were gonna spend.
yes. Do we just as much make the board aware of being under budget?
I feel like I have never heard that before, so
So
I could be
actu-
wrong.
Actually, to that point, we actually have an item for next week's. It's one of the asphalt projects that I shared with you guys in the 2x2 that we were $18,000 less
Right.
than what we budgeted for.
I remember that.
So, yeah, it does happen. It's not very often, but.
Well, I mean, people are bidding, and
Yeah.
usually contractors bid at a certain amount, we agree to a certain amount. It's not often that we see materials go less.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see it, but is that the expectation, just as much to be made aware of those ones?
I think it's practice that we currently have, so,
Custom, not a requirement
Yeah.
under the policy.
correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Question, anything?
To move forward then? Okay, 6220, bidder request for proposal requirements. The policy and procedure have been revised based on input from State Auditor's Office and WASBO, which is Washington Association of School Business Officials. The revisions specify that the board must have entered into agreements under the Interlocal Cooperation Act before making any purchases under those special terms. So we can't say we're going to make the purchase and then join the co-op. We have to be a member of the co-op. The revisions clarify information about the procedure or procurement using federal funds. For construction-related services, the bid document should encourage participation by minority or women-owned business enterprises. Updates also incorporate provisions from House Bill 1086, local government contracting, community service organizations, and this regards using community service organizations such as Chamber of Commerce, service organizations, community or youth groups that use non-paid volunteers to complete the projects. The caveat there is that the value of these contracts may not exceed the lesser of $75,000 or $2 per resident of the district in a calendar year. Sarah, I don't know if you have other information.
I wanted that explained a little bit, that last part, because when I read it, I didn't know exactly what it meant. So like, again, I understand the words, but I don't understand what it means. So if you could explain that, that would be helpful.
Absolutely, thank you. So this really is now allowing us to work with our local community organizations and really kind of bypass that competitive bid process, which can be kind of daunting for some of our local community groups. And so it really allows them to support our district in small works. That is kind of a legal term, but really just projects under that $75,000 mark. And it just allows also those community-based organizations to not have to follow prevailing wage law, which is really quite important as well. So it just gives our community, it just allows us to create more partnerships when it comes to small projects.
But this wouldn't, because the first thing that I came to mind, and I know this is probably bad, but like, we're not going to contract with like the state prison system and use inmates for free or anything like that, right? Like, that's not what this means. We just mean local Chamber of Commerce, but I just don't want to exploit volunteers. That was, when I looked at that, I was like, I get that there's some volunteer service organizations, Kiwanis, Lions, et cetera, that exist, but I get it's a law and whatnot. So can you address that a little bit? I'm curious what that means and how we wouldn't exploit volunteers or free labor.
So with any of our projects that our capital maintenance team is responsible for, they really make sure that all of our vendors that we are partnering with are vetted. They're also going to project sites and making sure that things are handled appropriately. That's really tied to more federal state guidelines, again, back to that small works project, prevailing wage law, Davis-Bacon Act. But this is really just making sure that, and it's really opening the door, truthfully, for a lot of our smaller groups. As you just said, the Kiwanis Club, the Lions, the Eagles. So any of those organizations that really want to support our school district in small projects to kind of build a partnership together, it really kind of allows us to kind of say we don't have to go through competitive bid law, and allows us to begin that partnership on those small projects.
And the House bill actually calls out community service organizations instead of just volunteers.
Got it.
Could you give me an example of that, please?
May I for just a second before we get too far with this? Just so we're clear, this is not like a Kent School District proposal. This was a law passed for the whole state, right? So this isn't like us saying something about community groups in Kent. A state law passed, and WASDA says anytime you change state law, you got to make sure your policies align with that. But nevertheless, go ahead.
Could you possibly give me an example of that?
An example of like a project?
Yeah.
So actually, Kent Meridian High School is currently doing a really amazing rain garden project through a grant. And so if there was an organization in the valley that wanted to support Kent Meridian with this project, that we can actually work with them, alongside them, to kind of support that project. Now, that's kind of an interesting project I just brought to mind, because obviously most of that project is funded by a grant through King County, but it's really just kind of outlines kind of the level of partnerships that we can actually do with our community.
I guess, I mean, I get it's a law, but I'm just trying to think, like, I know the Kiwanis do a lot of service projects. Like, I know the park near my house has helped being built by the Kiwanis or funded by the Kiwanis. I'm just trying to think about what that would look like. I guess more to Director Amato's point, like what that would look like. So the Kiwanis would want to help Kent Meridian with the rain garden. They would submit a proposal to volunteer for labor. Like, I guess I just don't know what that looks like.
I was just kind of, I mean, I'm familiar with the rain garden, you know, in the King County grant, we were there when they opened the first one, but I thought that was under King County's supervision. So do we have to also supervise King County grants that they get?
And that may have not been, truthfully, the best example. It was more just a project that obviously is seen by our community, that's happening at our schools, that's really a feel-good project, but I think Ben Rarick has something to add.
So maybe like elementary, they want to have lines that have like hopscotch on their ground painted on. I've heard a school doing that, right?
Sure.
They want to have the United States map
Absolutely.
outlined.
There we go.
And so it's under 75,000. They could have a local company that does striping do it without having to go for a bid for.
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Director.
Here's a couple of the anecdotes from the bill report, just you were asking about examples, so they list some of them. So, a contract that is exempt from competitive bidding between a local government community service organization may also include improvements to a general public space, in addition to improvements to a park, a playground, a school playground, a public square, a port habitat site. And so it's really meant to be the much smaller sort of community garden typey projects.
Yep.
And essentially providing one opportunity to do those without complying with the prevailing wage. And because they're smaller, typically the prevailing wage is not a huge issue, right?
But would it still be competitive process? So if like a local plant organization and the Kiwanis were like, oh, we both want to help Canyon Ridge with their common spaces that are internal, the outdoor spaces.
And that's why it creates that cap.
Got it.
So basically it's, I mean, you can kind of imagine how this came to the legislature, right? So there's, let's say there's a community group that wants to do a garden or something, right? And all of a sudden they're finding out, oh, you know, because you have volunteers, but this is a public works project, you gotta pay prevailing wage. And everybody goes, what? Like, we just wanna build a garden, you know?
Yeah.
So it actually says,
just want hopscotch.
that's why
Yeah.
that,
The elementary
that's why that section says the value of the work and the local, obviously they gotta keep a cap so that this doesn't exploit, right? So it says basically that the value of the work must be at least twice that amount paid to the community service organization, and it creates $75,000 or $2 per resident. So they're saying for small projects, we're willing to allow you to use volunteers. That's essentially what this is. But it's most important to me was, so you know, this is just Washington state law. This is not a Kent School District proposal, and we're just kind of freshening up our policies to make sure that they comply with law.
No, I appreciate it. It just, I didn't understand it, so I really appreciate you kind of going through all of it. I'm not questioning it. I think it's, I would love to have more people that want to come and do community gardens and hopscotch in our playgrounds, so that's awesome.
It's House Bill 1086 for anybody that wants to actually read the fund from 2003. Or 2023.
Other questions?
Dr. Margell, still thinking?
No,
Good?
oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Move that one forward. We are up to 6550 capitalization threshold for leases and SBITAS, which stands for Subscription-Based Information Technology Arrangement. This policy is new to WASDA and new to us. WASDA developed this model policy to address recent statements of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board regarding lease and subscription-based information technology arrangements. And I'm not sure if Mr. Rarick or Ms. Dumelo have anything else to add.
I feel like we had a policy recently about leases. I'm trying to remember what that one was.
Oh, the houses?
That was house.
That was
things in
houses.
the house.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, okay, this is different than
Yep.
that. So got it. So because I was on property we own, and this
Right.
is just, there's a lot. Okay, yes, got it.
I don't question this, I just don't understand it, to be quite honest. Could somebody do a little bit better to explain it to me?
Can well, I'll make it a specific question. Sentence 2, paragraph 1.
Karen, do you have the policy up on the?
Oh, sorry.
Within the guidelines,
I'm sorry, Director Clark, what sentence within the guidelines of these statements?
yep,
So,
says may establish a liability threshold for reporting either a lease or civita that are considered to be de minimis when compared to the district's financial capacity.
Absolutely.
What
Thank
the
you.
heck does that mean? Sorry, I don't get it.
No, it's absolutely fine. So thank you for your time. So this policy, as basically written by WASDA, is really calling out two GASB statements. So GASB 87 and GASB 96. So GASB 87 is about leases and how we basically handle and report leases on our financial statement. Very important. GASB 96 is actually how we report and handle our longer than 1 year agreements for subscription-based technology softwares that we are leasing. That software is not actually owned by the district. So really, these two government guidances really is now requiring us to report them differently on our year-end financial statement. That's really important for the board to know. So the district was required to actually then come up with a dollar amount. So what dollar amount the district came up with? So OFM actually came up with two different dollar thresholds. So for GASB 87, it was $500,000, and for GASB 96, it was $1 million. So our district, within our business team, we went ahead and we began to speak to other Washington State school districts to determine what their thresholds were for these. So the amount of money that we are presenting to the board tonight is $250,000. That is also 5% of our ending fund balance for the 21-22 school year, which was $443 million, just to give the board some reference on that. So it's just really important just for the board to kind of acknowledge the time spent and
Hold
to
on, just
review
for
that.
the-
Thank you.
It's being recorded, right? We didn't have a $443 million fund balance. You meant budget. Budget, yeah. I know you know about that, but I know we're being recorded. I was like, yeah, I saw your eyes kind of like.
I'm gonna guess that we're leasing software from like Microsoft, is that accurate?
Absolutely.
And-
Yes, I believe so.
And I assume that there are actually different types of services that are being leased, is that accurate?
Absolutely.
And so you're just talking about the limits on those?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The intent of it basically is that it was pretty clear that as school districts, actually I think applies more than just school districts. It applies to, government agencies, but as districts, government agencies, counties, et cetera, incur more and more long-term liabilities in these large leases, financial regulators are saying, hey, we want to know that. So if you go out and commit yourself for 6 years at $500,000 a year, you should be disclosing that and reporting that in a certain way. And that's essentially what ASPIDA is. I think the acronym is subscription-based information technology arrangements. And those are becoming more and more prevalent, right? And they're getting to be bigger dollar amounts. And so now the government, the accounting regulators are saying, okay, now we're gonna have a clear standard about at what point do you need to report that as a long-term liability to the district. And so small districts obviously choose a number smaller than $250,000, right? OFM is $1 million. They're an enormous statewide organization. So 250 is sort of that reasonable. So if you think about if it's a 3 or 4 year thing, that's 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 years. So it's in a reasonable space of what an organization of our size would do.
Other questions or comments or concerns?
Move it forward?
Yep.
Sure.
And, sorry, I did one question, sorry, can we?
Of course.
This is per subscription, not in total, right? So if we have Microsoft for Office products, and then we have LexisNexis for blah, 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 and each one of those is under 250,000, they would not be reported as a long-term liability, only if one in particular was over that, then that one would be reported as a long-term liability as opposed to,
Great question.
yeah.
I want to make sure I'm still on. So we actually still report, we legally have to report the amount of services received or the software used within a current calendar year or fiscal year. It's really the 250 is really that threshold over the life cycle of that agreement or that subscription agreement. So that's really important for you to understand as well. So, and that can be a 3 or a 5 year agreement. So it's acknowledging how much do we spend in that fiscal year, and then actually what is our now long-term obligation to that for the remaining length of the agreement.
Okay, thank you.
You good?
Thank you.
You're welcome, of course. Yeah, amazing.
Okay, 6605, student safety, walking, biking, riding buses, and school patrol. So I know, President Benno, you had mentioned from the dais that you wanted to talk about this policy, but actually we had this kind of ready to move before we knew about that, and it only addresses the school patrol portion of it at this moment. So policy 3422 right now is our school patrol policy. We want to move that under the umbrella of this policy 6605 because it's still within the student safety portion, because 3422 is sudden cardiac arrest in student sports that we really need to get moving on. It's an essential policy, and it made sense to move the school patrol portion under this after talking with Mr. Heath and Executive Director Buzzard and Tim Kovich. It made sense to do that. The procedure has been updated as well, or will be if this moves forward, to include it under that as well. But I know you had other concerns, but at the moment, this is only addressing the school patrol portion. We can come back to that other part, but this is just to address that and get it moved under the correct policy.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question, because I know, because I'm assuming that's in the procedure, because I didn't see
It is.
in that, and I know that that's something like, if we do move this forward with the safety or school patrol, would we be able to see the procedure with all the discussion we talked about at our last board meeting about reducing the walking limits, et cetera, for elementary and middle school?
That's kind of a separate thing.
That's a separate thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I am interested, sorry, my father-in-law was a bus driver, school bus driver, and it's a really tough job. They do a lot of things all at the same time. I have a hard enough time listening to my kids and drive my car, and imagine having 84 kids behind you. Huge kudos to our bus drivers. And so I would really be interested in just marrying the policy and the procedure on this one. Just personally, it's important to me because it's interesting on here, to me, the first sentence about safety on the bus, and it really goes into emergency exit drills and riding on the bus, where very important. Having 84 children listening to you and doing what they should is probably, to me, a harder thing and more constant than the emergency exit. Still important, but I would be interested in seeing kind of that policy and procedure married together and what that looks like.
So at the moment, Mr. Dennison, the Director of Transportation, has looked at this policy, but with everything right now, it hasn't been refined. We just want to move this one portion at this point, but I know Dr. Behringer had talked to Mr. Dennison about at some point updating the rest of it.
Yes, we absolutely, and they are very aware that we're going to be moving to update the rest of that and come back and have conversations around walking distances and things like that. This specifically for this evening was only that we are moving the school patrol from the previous policy, which had, like you said, sudden cardiac arrest and athletic events and things like that, out of that space and into the student safety, walking school, riding buses, and school patrol, because it fit better, made more sense there. So it could be that tonight you say, yes, that makes sense to move that there. We still want to continue to have a conversation about, X. Because this piece right now for this evening's purposes was really just to get the school patrol on this particular policy.
But this won't put it back down at the bottom?
Not at all. We'll move it for approval, but knowing that the board wants to bring it back for the other portions of this policy.
And we do.
Yeah.
And we-
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. It's really only the school patrol portion we're discussing. Knowing that we'll be bringing it back.
And just so you know, Justin Dennison is very aware, based on previous conversations we've had in the boardroom, and the opportunity that he had during our work session, to be able to explain and answer some questions around walking distances and the impact and what that looks like and sounds like and potentially would cost and whatnot. So, yeah, there's no doubt that we're aware that this would come back.
Questions about the school patrol portion? Comments, concerns?
Do the kids that are at the, going out and standing in the crosswalks and stuff, is there some policy we have on the training they get for that, or is that in this handbook, or?
It's in the procedure, and it's part of the reason we're updating it too is that things have changed so much from how this policy reads. We don't do things the same way. Mr. Heath, are you able to address the training that they get now? I have it, and I can let you know. Okay.
Crossing guards and.
Yeah, the AAA does a training with them, and there's another, the Washington State Transportation, I believe, does a training for the students that are crossing guards. And that's organized by the principals at the buildings, and we have very few schools that do that any longer.
And you're saying that's in the procedure? and
Actually, the training is called out in the procedure, but I can sure get it to you ahead of time.
Okay. Does it speak to that in here at all?
It doesn't in the policy.
I mean, there is a portion that says, the superintendent designee shall establish rules and regulations pertaining to the operations of the school patrol.
And then how they're trained is actually in the procedure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm fine.
And I can sure get it to you.
I just think that, okay, great. Thank you.
Is everybody good to move it for an approval, knowing that it'll be coming back again before too long? Thank you. We're on to 1830, participation in school boards association. This is new to us. Give me a second to pull it up. This policy states that as required by law, board members are members of the Washington State School Directors Association. It also mentions that the association establishes the rate of membership dues at its annual meeting, provides model policies and other services in response to members' needs, and develops and implements a legislative program at the direction of its members. RCW 28A 345020 membership states that the membership of the School Directors Association shall comprise the members of the boards of directors of the school districts of the state. And that it's just clarifying that it is a law that board members are members of WASDA, and we pay the annual dues for that. Each district does.
Could you enlighten me what the dues are?
For 2023, it was just under $35,000 for the annual dues, and we spent $11,000 to WASDA for our BoardDocs subscription. So you're looking at about
And
my mouth's about 46,000 about per year. That includes our BoardDocs subscription.
in the RCW 28A, that's where this came?
Yes,
under? Okay.
membership, 28A 345020.
Could you tell me what year that went into effect?
Um,
I'm just curious. I can look it up.
I can pull it up. Let's see if I can click on it and have it.
I'm
come
just
up.
curious.
35 for dues and 40 for the,
I'll get it to you, Director Hamada.
Nope, no problem. Thank you.
so 11 or 12 are the,
I don't always know what I'm looking at on RCW site. So I'm like, does it say 1947, 1969? I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, thank
They
you.
list a million,
Yeah, so like, what date is it? I don't know. But there's a lot.
but I definitely will get it to you.
Thank you.
You bet.
Really gets us is the state on.
Any questions on that besides the cost of the annual membership?
You can get a separate audit, you still have to pay the state auditor.
Comments, questions, concerns? Looks like we can move forward.
Okay. Okay, we are on to 4220. In trying to work through this policy, I wanted to provide you some context, so I printed off a packet at your seat that shows the WASDA model, our current, and what was proposed at the last work session. I also would like to read something that Director Farah emailed to me. He said, if you would read this and have the rest of the board discuss, I would appreciate it. So before we go into discussion, I'd like to read this so you can talk about what he sent in. He said, my version of this policy.
Which one are you reading?
Director Ferris.
Director
Oh,
Farah.
just,
Yeah.
we don't have it in front of us.
You don't have his,
Okay,
no,
okay, thank you, I'm
sorry.
sorry.
I was going to print it, but he asked me to read it, so I
Okay.
felt like it was
No,
respectful to
I'm
do
fine. I
it
was
that
just
way.
looking for it. Thank you, this is
Sure.
great.
The district welcomes any constructive criticism. At the same time, the board has confidence in its staff and programs. The board will protect staff and programs from unwarranted criticism or disruptive interferences. Complaints received by the board or a board director will be referred to the superintendent or designee for investigation. The superintendent will develop procedures to handle complaints concerning staff or programs. Complaints regarding the instructional materials should be handled in the manner provided for in Policy 2020, Course Design, Selection, and Adoption of Instructional Materials. Complaints from a person who resides within Kent School District boundaries who is not an employee of the district, or from a person who has a student in the district should be handled by individual board director or all board directors. Complaints from Kent School District staff against other district staff will be handled through appropriate provisions in an applicable collective bargaining agreement under other district policy or by contacting human resources and are not covered by this policy. That's the end of what he wrote.
And so that is his,
He said he would like that, that's his proposed version.
Thoughts, comments, questions?
Well, that's not the one I want.
I mean, I feel like, and I feel like when this was brought forward at the beginning of time, 10 readings ago, there was a few things that the staff wanted to address, that they brought this forward for us to address. One was that complaints against the board of directors do not apply here, right? Because there's other processes for that. The second thing was about contractual staff on staff complaints that would be taken out of here as well. And the third, I forgot what the third was.
against the superintendent.
No, that wasn't it. Mr. Brockville, what was the third one?
Clarifies it does not apply to the board. Complaining party has to be a resident of
A
Kent School
resident,
District
yeah.
footprint or a parent of a student here.
Yeah, and those are the three things that was brought forward, that the staff brought forward to discuss. And I feel like the complaints against the superintendent was something that was not necessarily come from the staff, that was just a discussion of the board. So like, those were the three things that were originally brought to us, brought forward. I feel like there's been a lot of I mean, and all those things I think we need to do. Like, I feel like we should move forward with all those. I think what's kind of holding us up is that process of complaints against the superintendent. I think that's been kind of like the process that we have not agreed of as a board, as a board. So I guess the other stuff I think we agree with and we're okay with. I feel like we need to discuss that specific part because I think that's the part we're disagreeing on. If I'm missing anything, Mr. Brockville.
No, just that staff proposed originally that the superintendent be removed. And I think that's what caused a lot of discussion, healthy discussion among the community and the board. But now it's back in, and there was some discussion about a form and whether a form was advisable. So we created a form with that at the board's request. And we think the way it's proposed both complies with the Board of Directors Superintendent contract and the spirit of this, which is your governmental oversight. It gives you flexibility to reject claims, but you can bring them in under executive session, which is in your contract, to talk about job performance.
The reason I printed everything off was to, especially from WASDA, is so you can see our starting point of what we had before, what we morphed into, and the proposal now. So you can see the big differences between where we originally started from.
And the one that we're bringing forward is the one on the second page, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So the one on the third page,
Let's see.
that is,
That is our current 4220.
so I guess
I've got 4 of these, and I need to know which one we're working off of.
There are three pieces of paper stapled together. The first one is the WASDA model version. The second one is the one that was brought to the board last work session. And the third one is what our current 4220 is.
so
I've got a stack of these. I've got a whole stack of these over here. Oh, thank you.
And I've said this about other things that I didn't love seeing procedure in policy. That's why you have policy and that's why you have procedure. They are different. And so I'm trying to understand why the sentence of,
Which document?
looking on page 3.
Our current one,
The current one.
Yep.
Yeah.
okay?
Except that complaints against the superintendent shall be handled by the board directly. Why do we need all of the language about kind of the whole process? Because again, process, procedures, as opposed to policy.
I think the fundamental difference here is whether the superintendent remains in this procedure.
I guess that's the second question,
Yeah.
right? So first, does the superintendent remain in here? And second, if the superintendent does remain in here, do we need to outline an entire process within policy? Or can we just have the simple sentence of, except complaints against the superintendent shall be handled by the board directly? So I think those are two fundamental questions.
I agree. They are fundamental questions. Yeah. And I think partly for me, in my years of doing policy documents, et cetera, not on the board, but like in union and other organization, if we want the procedure to say something, do something, we have to say something in the policy. So I think that's why a lot of policy documents could look kind of procedure-y, because if there's something that we as a board want done in the procedure, we have to kind of, not outline it, but we have to say it in the document, which is why the WASDA policy, et cetera, I feel like seems procedure-y a lot of times. And so if we want a specific thing to happen in the procedure, we want the policy to kind of reflect that, even though it may seem like we're creating procedure. But like I agree, we could possibly limit, change, et cetera, but I think that's the purpose, is like we want to see it in the procedure, so if we want it, we have to say it. Because otherwise it won't happen.
I disagree with that. I think that there's many different things that happen in our procedures that are said kind of on the basis in policy, and they happen in procedures. Otherwise, if you had one and the same, you would just need one document. I think, and like the WASL,
Yep.
right? That would be in procedure, because the WASL happened however long ago, we don't, right? And so you change that, you update it as things adapt and grow, but the procedure, or the policy stays the same. We assess students, right? And so, and that's why I think we've been able to have that policy for 23 years, right? Is because it is written in a way that's fundamental. Specifically naming a form and what is on that form, to me, sounds very procedural. And I don't believe that that belongs in policy. Am I saying that there should be a procedure? Absolutely. Whatever, just like we've been saying with all of these other ones, and believe me, it's not just the 4220.
Yep.
I think in all of these ones, we're saying you need to have a procedure that matches the policy. But in this one, we're putting that into policy, and I don't think that they belong in the same thing.
I think the only difference with this policy, and it's not the only one, there's a few that are like this, but the only difference between this policy and the other ones is this is our policy, it's the board's policy. Like, it doesn't necessarily live in staff. Like, this is ours. And that's why I think for this one, we can make some notes of like what we want the procedure to look like, because it's ours. We're dictating this, we're saying complaints need to be filed this way, and that's, I think, a little bit different than the other ones. And correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but this is ours.
No, and I'm going to, again, because this wasn't in the procedure before at all, until we revised it a couple years ago, and we finally came to a conclusion of all 5 board directors were unanimous, that we would put something in there about the superintendent, because it had never been addressed. And to me, it has to be a separate issue that the board spells out specifics on how it's going to be handled, because they never have done it that way before. And so we changed it to say that you could have complaints on the staff and all that. I agree that goes with the CBOs, and there's already a method for all of that. But on the superintendent, I do think we have to spell it out, and that's why I took the time to write all that out and put all that out there, because it's really important to me that no matter how big you are, if you're President of the United States, you're not going to be the only one that has the last say. You can't do things that are against the law, or you can't do things that are way out of line. And if we have one employee, that's a pretty big job for the board as a whole to manage. And I just think it has to be spelled out very specifically, just like on the other policy that I thought, that looked very procedure-wise, that was in policy. But this is ours, and this is why I want it spelled out. If we find out it's too cumbersome, it's not working, again, to me, this is not going to be, you've already gone through the chain of command. You're not just going to go there, some little thing, as a parent or resident or community member. This is going to be a big deal. And you feel that you've gone all the way through and even had the superintendent look at this issue, and you are totally feel that you've been wronged, then I think you need your community elected officials to look at it. And I just feel strongly about that. And if you don't spell it out, it's just not going to have any merit.
Can I ask a question? This second, so we have WASDA. I'm assuming the second one is what Director Hamada submitted.
Proposed last.
And then we have this one.
Which is our current.
Well, current. Do we have, or is the one that Director Hamada proposed the one that the staff is bringing forward, like, yeah, we like this because it meets what's there? I guess that's my question.
Go ahead. Yeah. The board, I struggle with the basic argument.
Can I get my question answered first? Because I think that's important to know, because if there's not one that's being proposed, like, I'm happy to hear you, but I really want my question answered.
What you have before you tonight is an amalgamation of, a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
And that included Director Hamada's input that I massaged to make it consistent and give some voice to her concerns for your consideration. So that's in there. But it's not a wholesale policy drafted by Director Hamada. And so we reviewed those and found them to be consistent with the intent. They were sort of policy sort of statements that described the intent, and they were fairly innocuous, and they weren't distracting. So, we endorse that. I would also just say, right now, our policy, what we have on the table is better than what we have currently in our policy, because of those 3 things that we wanted to get.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the only thing I would have to say. It is your policy, but
Thank you. And Director Clark, my bad. I just want to make sure I heard that.
Okay. So I'm in disagreement with Director Hamada in terms of formalizing a process that goes speaking directly to judgments and criticisms of the superintendent. The oversight of this district is with the board, but that's already stated in our description of what we do. So to put in additional outside inputs is to basically step aside from the structure that was put in place and is used in every other school district in this state. So we're creating a backdrop of significant paperwork when, in effect, if you simply struck the last paragraph, you would have a good overview of what we're doing under 4220 and why, and then we specifically state it can't be used against the board or the superintendent, but we're acknowledging that we have to have a process to deal with constructive criticism. Okay, that's the way the board operates, and that's satisfactory to me.
And I will say, looking at all of our surrounding districts, the superintendent is not included in this policy.
I guess for me, like I feel like sometimes, this is Joe speaking personal and not anything else, just I feel like sometimes if, like I'm counted as a vote. Oh, there's 5, we need 3, okay, we have 3, that's it. And so I don't want something in our process that relies on I'm only a vote. So if I'm one of 2 votes, then my voice doesn't matter. So if someone files a complaint and I'm like, we should really address this, and 3 board members are like, like I don't feel like then I'm heard. Like even though parliamentary procedure, whatever says, you know, majority rules, et cetera. And I think that a process, instead of relying on a majority of the board members, that people can still have their voice heard, file a complaint, and then we as a board can look at this and say whether or not we need to move it forward or act on it, or we can as a collective say, you know, we don't need to look like at this. I don't know, I just don't feel like, I think saying that we're gonna rely on the board and the contract to kind of work itself out, and I know that a lot of times with politics, with corporations, with government entities, there's a lot of red tape, people don't always get heard, and there needs to be a process, I think, to get to be heard. Even if the board says, you know what, we're not gonna address it, at least someone had a way to make their voice heard instead of relying on Robert's rules and politics of 3 votes count, and then we'll hear you or not. But even if it gets to the point where that happens, at least they had a process to submit to make their voice heard. And I'm all about making sure that we allow community members who live in our district and have students that go here, et cetera, have the voices heard about how we operate. Okay. That's why I feel strongly about it.
All right, but and my objection to that, as stated, is the reality is the board ultimately determines whether they will keep the superintendent, obviously on a straight vote. It's a numerical count out of 5. The process, though, of what the people's representatives are about should be an attempt to take constructive criticism and give direction to create a pathway for the superintendent to address the problem. But once you get beyond that, you're starting to micromanage. And that's a problem because that isn't the way the process is set up to work. So just leaving this process, minus that last paragraph, you have a process that says we can bring in, particularly through executive session, directions and hopefully consensus from the board that there has to be a different addressing of the problem than currently exists.
How did the problem get to us, though? I guess that's the question. How do we hear these concerns? The reason why I want to more formalize my inbox, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Am I going to address every single concern? No. If we formalize a process, we know which ones are the most serious to address if there is a concern. That's why I call for not call for it, I'm calling for it. No, that's why I think we should have that process more formalized so that we know which ones, some people just want to blow off steam, some people just want to complain, but some people actually have a complaint to file. That's why I want that in there formalized, because that allows us to be like, oh, someone filed a formal complaint. We need to check in with the superintendent about that and have a conversation. Because otherwise, I don't want to minimize people's complaints, but some complaints are more, what's the word I'm trying to say, are serious than others. They're not that they all matter or don't matter, but some are more serious that we have to address and some aren't. Like if someone's complaining about, like they don't like that we close the street because we're painting or paving the parking lot, okay, yeah, that's annoying, but is that a complaint to file? No. But if the superintendent made a comment that was sexist to someone at a game, I would want a formal complaint to receive that so we can talk about it. Because otherwise, if there's not a formal complaint, I don't know about it, right? Versus just emails. That's Joe's opinion.
Well, and to speak to that issue, President Bento, and to your issue, I respect your opinion, Tim, but I think that just once a year looking at a contract and hiring and firing somebody is not the time. I think things can rise to an occasion that they need to be solved, and you don't want to do that and wait to do that till the end of the year. If it's that egregious and we haven't taken care of it and it's gone through the chain of command and it's still out there, you know, well, then you vote on you're going to renew a contract. That's how we get our voice heard. To me, that doesn't show a lot of transparency to our community. And if we want to change the real culture of a lot of things, people need to be heard, whether we like it or not. And sometimes, believe me, I look at this email and I go, oh my gosh, and are we going to address this again? But this is only for egregious things to say that at the top of our leadership in this district, we still have our community. These are public schools. We work for these are our customers, and we cannot forget that. And if you don't want your public to be heard and you only hear maybe once a year on a hiring or firing on some grievous issue, then you're going to have an unhappy public. And I just don't believe in it. I believe public schools will not exist, and the dollars behind it to build them and build the facilities will not get done if people feel like they don't have a voice to be heard. And that's just my opinion.
Okay. Sorry, I've been taking notes because I've been listening to all of this. First, I would say that the very top of every single policy is that this is a board policy and procedure. So all of these are our policies, not just 4220. And in fact, I hope that the ones that actually involve children and students and our staff are not somehow less than this one. And I'll leave that there. All of them are our policies. Second, the idea that somebody filling out a form makes their issue more serious than something else, I also take issue at. And that these are only for the most serious things. We cannot control whom or for what the form is filled out for. And so the act of filling out the form does not make the problem serious or not. It's the problem on its face. And so I would also say if any board waits until the end of the year and doesn't listen to their constituents, well then they're not a very good board. Because your job in every single day and what we do in our more than 2 meetings a month,
Yep.
And everything is way more than once a year. And so the idea that, again, that we need a form to tell us to do what we're elected or appointed to do is, I also take issue with that. I still have an idea, and I go back to the two questions I really have, is should the superintendent be involved in this or not? And then I hold firmly that there's a difference between policy and procedure. And I don't believe, I think about and having fundamental language involved in something allows for it to be more stable. When we start going into specifics, that belongs in procedure, which can be changed. And so I understand that, you know, if something doesn't work, and I appreciate that Director Hamada understands that, you know, this may or may not work, and that's great, but then that belongs in procedure, and then we can change procedure. The policy of what we do is fundamental, and the strength of having those, I really do believe that they belong in two different places. Those are all my comments.
I mean, I hear you about the policies. Obviously, we vote on all of them. But if someone has a complaint about a book at a school, we don't have anything to do with it. If someone has an issue with curriculum, we don't have anything to do with it. If someone has an issue with their superintendent, that's why I said this is our policy, because we, there's not, I feel like, this is gonna sound bad, I feel like there's not a lot of policies we actually do stuff with. A lot of our staff handle a lot of the policies. That's why I was saying this is our policy, because this is something that we actually would handle. And that's what I meant. Now, hopefully that's what it sounded like. I'm not saying that none of the policies are important than others. And I guess, like, I'm saying a form, I mean formal process. It could be a form. I'd say form because a form is easy. But there should be a formal process, whether it's a form or not. There has to be some sort of formal process to address concerns. Because to people, like a closed parking lot is really annoying and they're gonna complain about it. To me, I'm like, I'm sorry you're annoyed, but like, to me, it's not as big of an issue. Like, there's levels, we know there's levels. That's why in this proposed policy, we can decide if we bring something forward or not. So for, like, that's why I mean, like, formal process. And it doesn't mean that by filling out a piece of paper is more important, but I feel like if by filling out some sort of process or some sort of form or formal process, it formalizes it so that we can address it. Because if I were to go through every single email about a complaint that someone had, like, we would be very busy. If I were to say, hey, you know what, why don't you file this complaint? If you really feel strongly about that, why don't you file this complaint? And I think that would do its job, at least to me. And so that's why I want to make sure that you heard.
And before I lose my train of thought here, because I tend to after you go on. In our policies, it says the superintendent is in charge of staff, operations, and procedures. Those I've got down straight, that we give all that to him, he takes care of it, he does it. Or she does it, or whoever's in charge.
Thank you.
But there is no policy or nothing that says that the person at the top of this district cannot, if they have gone through a chain of command, and I'm not saying you bring everything to 4220. You go through the procedures to handle it at the lowest level all the way up. And if you've even taken it to the superintendent and you still feel your issue has not been addressed, I strongly feel our board has to take over and we have to have the board policy. And that's why I probably agree with President Bento on this is a board policy because we're developing it on one employee. All the rest of them are absolutely extremely important. All of our policies are. That has nothing to do with it.
And that's why I asked Mr. Brockvogel about like whether the staff was okay with this, and if this was re-edited to include some of our comments and Director Hamada's piece last time and kind of stamped and endorsed. For me, like, it's good, if it's good enough for the staff, it's good enough for me. And so I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I just feel like this is a 10th reading now, and I feel like the things that the staff originally wanted in here are mostly in here. It's been kind of stamped, endorsed. I feel like, to me, we should just move it forward. And if we get like 100 complaints a day using the form, then we're like, you know what, let's change that. But for me, like, I feel like we have to have something and just move forward on this.
I want to bring back, this is complaints concerning staff or programs. It's broad. It's about more than one staff member.
Yep, correct.
So we don't want to focus on.
Correct, and that's why I'm saying yes. Thank you for saying that, but I also, staff includes the superintendent, and that's why I feel like it should be included.
I also hear from the staff, when you kind of mention the staff, that they're also referring us to every other district in our area that uses the language that is not this. And so I would not say their willingness to help us try to wordsmith something is their endorsement of it.
I was actually gonna ask that clarification of Mr. Brockvogel when he said that, staff was reworking this, and you said that staff, like, endorsed it.
That's what I heard Mr.
Based-
Brockwell
yeah.
say, so.
Me sitting here in this role, I'm
Yeah.
just curious about that piece, just
I'll-
to bring clarification to this whole entire conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Barrier. I would say that, this is just one person speaking. 4220 is not required by law. It's caused a lot of problems, and it's very difficult to even deal with. My preference would be, it's not even appropriate to have it. There's so many avenues to complain in this place. And then the other preference, if you weren't going to take that, is certainly remove the superintendent, because you have contractual rights you have to honor. You made promises, and you deal with his performance in accordance with the contract. Somehow we've got to, make these live together if you pass it consistently. So that would be my preference, in addition to the other things that we've gotten in there, to get him out and get the other things in, if we're going to make the change. My strong preference would be just not to even have 4220.
Okay, out of curiosity, can you live with Director Farah's proposal?
I think that may be, I think it's well-intentioned, certainly, but I heard that the board itself would be taking on complaints, and that's problematic functionally, operationally, and then from a liability standpoint, you're taking on roles outside the statute, so you may not be covered by our insurance for those decisions made by doing those things. It's just not, it seems difficult to accept at first read, but if that's the wish of the board, then we can certainly look at it.
I also don't see anywhere, and I appreciate Director Hamada's conversations of, you've gone up the chain of command. That's not specified in here at all. The only thing I'm seeing is complaints against the superintendent will be directed to the Kent School District Board of Directors. So there's no idea of chain of command, nothing about it, and so.
I thought that was in the procedure that we saw.
It's in the procedure.
It should be in the procedure.
It's in the procedure.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the current procedure is a complaint against staff or a program goes up through the administration, and there's this automatic appeal right to the board, which I think we will probably end up changing. Because that doesn't fully delegate the administrative duties to the superintendent the way we've been talking about.
So I guess just to see that, if all complaints against the superintendent can already be dealt with by the board, how can there be a chain of command when the command is one?
Right. Or put another way, if you didn't like how it went, you could get another shot at the superintendent and have him reinvestigated. There are always these possibilities that people will take advantage of. And, hopefully people are well-intentioned when they file these things, but sometimes they interpose them for improper purposes, They do it because they didn't get their say in some sort of other forum, or it's really a union issue, or it's double dipping in a grievance, or it's this or it's that. That's why, when we looked at this, we really looked at whether we could just abolish it altogether, because there seemed to be so many ways to complain. And then it's difficult enough to manage the place with all your contractual duties without having to, constantly address people making complaints about the very management decisions you're supposed to make.
I guess for me, a couple things, I feel like we adopt WASDA policies all the time, so I wouldn't feel comfortable just abolishing one just because we have issues with one process. And the other thing, I don't think we necessarily, it's good to compare other districts to things, but also if we were to compare a district to a lot of things, we'd have STEAM, we'd have 4th and 5th grade, band and orchestra, there'd be other things. So for me, I'd be it's good to compare, but I don't think that just because the other school districts don't necessarily do that doesn't mean that we don't have to do that, because we currently have it in our policy, it's there right now. So I think that's important to kind of think about, that's something that has been important, and I think it's something that continues to be important.
But yes, we also do compare ourselves to Renton. Quite
Correct.
often, we talked about the IB program
Yep.
today. We talked about, so we can, the hand that giveth is the hand that taketh away
Yep.
too, right? So
Yep.
if we're going to compare, are going to compare on many different things.
Oh, yeah.
Or not.
Or not. Yep.
And so I think that it is at least of note and of interest that we are the anomaly. And with that, as this stands here, I am not comfortable having process in our procedure in policy.
And neither am I.
And I'm also thinking that there are other portions of the policy that we all agree on and need to change. And so we need to have a very simple one that changes those and gets those through and done without making a complicated procedure within our policy. And that is what I'm comfortable moving forward with.
Our current policy includes that section that we're having a disagreement on. So if we change the things that we mentioned earlier, we could do that, but that piece would still be in there. And I feel like people are not comfortable with that. So I guess the question would be to Ms. Halley, Mr. Buckvogel, Deputy Superintendent, like what would, how, not how, I was gonna say, how easy would that process be? It wouldn't be. But like, what would that look like? How would we do that?
Well, I think that that was the attempt of Director Farah's, what he was trying to do.
And I respectfully disagree.
And then we heard from Mr. Buckvogel that probably wouldn't benefit us to have that language because we might be.
I'm not saying it was correct.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was perfect as written,
Yeah.
but I'm saying I think that that was his attempt to do that without him being here, and I don't want to speak for him. But that seems like what was trying to be done, but I could have been interpreting it wrong. So again, without him here, and I'm not comfortable putting procedure in policy.
I mean, we've done that several other times tonight, so.
And I've complained about all of them.
Well, it's the board's decision, and we're not worn down too much yet, so what we can do is take it back, hear you say, make some modest changes to the policy itself, and adjust the procedure to effectuate what we're talking about.
We did adjust a policy today that I feel like that we still need to work on, but we adjusted it for the portion that we could all agree on needed to be added to
Okay.
it, right?
Yep.
We agreed that we were going to add crossing guards,
School
students,
patrol,
students stay, right, into a policy that we know that there's more work to be done. I feel like that there are 3 items that are clearly agreed upon. I think that we change the language for those 3 items that we all clearly agree upon, and if we want to continue to work on the policy, that's fine. But I say that we get those 3 items in and get it done. It would be where I'm at.
For the public record, would you mind restating, and for my benefit as well, and for the board to hear those 3 items? Would you mind restating those?
Joe, I think you said them
It
earlier.
was removing the board as complainants, whatever we call it,
Respondents?
respondents. It's a long night.
Yeah, I can.
Yes, thank you. I was like, I forget.
The complaining party have to be a resident of the KSD
Yes.
footprint or a parent of a child in the school district. No employee on employee complaint.
And I would feel comfortable moving forward on those 3 things, changing those 3 things. How do my
Parent or
colleagues?
guardian,
Oh, okay, parent, yeah.
parent or
Yeah,
guardian.
sure, yeah.
How do my colleagues feel?
Could you repeat that one more time?
The 3 changes will be, the complaining party has to be a resident of the KSD footprint or a parent of a child or guardian in the district. No employee on employee complaint. It clarifies that the board will not be the subject of a complaint.
Is there anything about redundancy?
Not in the policy presently or the other, but we could put that in the procedure, or we can add it in the policy. I know what you're saying, because theoretically, that's been one of the problems, is that people have so many bites out of the apple. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, you're stuck with a policy that requires you to do something that
Yeah.
you should.
Can that be procedural?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll take,
And for clarification, I agree with all that, but you're saying that we would maintain the original policy we have now with those changes, which in the original policy still keeps in the superintendent can be overthought
That's-
by the board?
That's what I'm hearing.
That's what I'm
You
saying.
understand that?
That's what I'm understanding.
Okay. And
I'd like to get those 3 done. We have an agreement on that.
And you have no problem with keeping as it is today, with the superintendent still being able to come to the board for review?
We're only changing those three things.
We're changing those three things.
Keeping everything, and then
But
having further
maintaining
discussion.
that part of it where he comes, there still is he or she still has a possibility for, after it's gone through all the other things in the procedure, to bring that to the board on the superintendent.
We can't necessarily vote or whatever, but Ms. Holly can say whether or not there's a
Well,
consensus.
I do believe there's consensus to move it forward the way you're talking about.
Okay, I just want to
With
make
those
sure
three
you
items
understand
and
we're
leaving
we're
the-
just adjusting, but we're also maintaining, because that could be confusing, okay?
Director Clark?
How do my colleagues feel?
I'm in favor of simplicity, and I'm in favor of recognizing that other school districts have gone through this conversation, come up with a much simpler answer.
That's great. And is there consensus for moving it forward to our next meeting with those three changes?
Bears with me?
Dr. Margell, are you?
I'm just reading a language and seeing if there's a way that we can get consensus with.
The three items that were brought forward.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with that. And I just hear Director Clark, except complaints received by the board or board members will be referred to the superintendent as any person, except for complaints against the superintendent, which shall be handled by board, what's the word that makes the power of the
Consideration.
board? But it's by the board's
Authority?
authority.
How about oversight?
Oversight, yeah, that's a better word.
What I was trying to get to is that inherently in the role of a board member, you have oversight of the superintendent, not because of 4220. And so what I was trying to do is say the board needs to take the criticism or whatever complaints, I think was the word in here, used, because of its authority as the oversight of the superintendent.
I
So,
hear you. Yeah.
and yes, it's not 4220 that gives it that, it's being voted in by the population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you saying remove the superintendent line?
No.
No?
Change. I hear Director Margell says at the end, except complaints against the superintendent shall be handled by the board directly based on its authority or something like that.
Handled by the authority of the board,
Got it.
would be how I would say it.
Oversight.
Oversight's fine. Authority, I know, has connotations to it, but I think I'm using some of the language that you would find in kind of the establishment documents.
And I would be okay with that. I would say
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
And I would be okay if you leave that in there.
Director Clark? Okay, well then I go back to the three things before, I'm fine with those.
But, I mean, is there a consensus? We're not voting. Is there a consensus doing that? That would be the question I would ask.
See, this is my struggle without Director Farrer here. We're really missing that input.
And while I hear that, but we're here now, and if it's brought to the next meeting to vote, then we're able to do that.
Are we actually bringing it to the next meeting to vote, or are we bringing it with the changed language proposed for a review at a work session? I mean, if it's 10 or if it's 12, we want it right.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure, are we bringing it to the next policy work session or the actual board meeting itself?
I would want to bring it to the next not the next meeting, but the 26th.
Yeah.
That's what I would want to see.
And I would be with that too.
And I want policy.
I'm sorry.
And I would prefer to go through policy with all 5 board members present.
I just worry that what what ended up happening last time where we felt like the language was going to be discussed in the next policy session, got to the board and then was like kicked back. But we're not gonna have a policy session before.
No, we'll have one November 1st.
Okay,
That's the next policy work session.
so then we can just, I mean, I guess we can just allow for all the directors to choose to make a motion to put it back to actually look at it in
If we need to.
procedures,
Yeah, we need to.
or in policy work session.
So what am I hearing you say, so it's clear? Are you comfortable moving it to the 25th meeting?
Oh, I think it's going to anyway. So if we bring it to the board, I'm going to guess that Director Farrow will want to weigh in on this one, since he's proposed language that we haven't really considered. So I think that by saying it's going to go to the meeting, it's going to go back to the policy work session anyway.
So bring it to the actual regular board meeting for voting? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying, but that's not what I hear Director Margell saying.
No, I think it should be, I think that, Wally gave us something to look at. We didn't get to hear his opinion on it. We didn't get to discuss it. I believe it should go to that. If we do bring it to the next board meeting to be voted on, I think a motion will be made to bring it to the next work session anyway.
While I hear that, I remember a few months ago, I brought forward a statement about libraries that was put aside and we never came back to it. So while I hear what you're saying, like, I feel like we all should be, if we all are able to submit things, we all should have equal opportunity to do that. And I feel like sometimes, and I know this is rude to say, but the world is won by those who show up. And no, not Director Farrow's fault. He has other things going on, and that's fine. But like, we're here now, and we're decision makers, and we can't always just wait for other people. For me, that's my mindset sometimes when it comes to these things.
And maybe a motion will be made and won't be passed.
Maybe.
Maybe.
But what am I hearing you say? So we know.
But we need to, I need it very spelled out this time.
Do we want to bring it to the board meeting on the 25th? I guess that's kind of what we're looking at.
I prefer go to policy meeting.
I prefer policy meeting, having it all written out for all of us to discuss and look at it.
So so then what are we gonna do? Because then at this point, we just,
Don't have a consensus.
We don't have a consensus to move it to the 25th.
there's not a consensus to move it to the next policy session. So then this just dies here then.
You have mute, nothing. Because
'Cause
we're not
that's-
voting in here, folks.
No,
Because
no.
that's how it works. So unless I'm wrong, if we don't have a consensus to move it forward or move it to the next policy,
I would
then
say
we're done
we
with
could
this.
write out the language 100% and have it out, but we have 3 minutes.
Yep. Unless we move to extend, since this is a special meeting, we would have to move to extend time.
I move to extend.
How long would you like to extend, Director Amanda?
How about 20 minutes?
So to 6:20 or 7:20?
Yeah.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, let's call for a vote. I'll call for a vote. So all those in favor
Well,
extending?
we can't vote in here though, can
Oh,
we?
Oh, yeah, we can't vote on
can't.
this, right?
So why are we motioning?
We can't.
but can't we move to extend time?
It's a special meeting and it ends at 7, and under the special meeting rules,
It's a work session, not a
Work
special
session,
meeting.
yeah.
It's
Special
considered a
meeting.
special
They
meeting.
call a work session a special meeting? Okay,
there's
got it.
only regular meetings and special meetings.
Okay.
I feel like we moved to extend time before on special meetings, unless we did that incorrectly.
We probably have, but as a technical matter, yeah, it's not real clear whether we can do that. I would just focus perhaps on the utility of doing it. Are we going to draft now for 20 minutes and then come back?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I was suggesting.
That's what I was suggesting.
My only thought is that, Mr. Brockvogel, and just correct me if I'm wrong, I thought the special meeting had an endpoint and no voting.
It has voting if the voting is allowed in the agenda, if it's on the agenda or the notice, the public notice. And you're restricted to the activity on the agenda. And so the time ending is on the agenda. So,
Sounds like it's a gray area to me.
um,
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but
we have certainly, in the past, recessed a meeting that was not going to go as long. And that was the question I had before. But extending it is a different question.
I move to recess for 10 minutes.
Okay, it's been moved. Do we need to second?
Can we vote?
we can't.
If it's on the agenda, like we had a vote to whether or not to move 4220 earlier. We voted on that because it's the agenda. We can,
Well,
I'm
you're not
confused.
restricted from routine parliamentary motions.
Correct.
You're restricted on substantive motions that pertain to the agenda and what you're hearing.
Okay.
So the idea in a special meeting notice is you can only deal with what's on the special meeting because the public didn't have all the 3 days notice and that kind of thing. So that's sort of the idea. But you still have parliamentary rules that are.
But this is on the agenda,
It is.
so would not fall into that?
that's what I thought.
You can vote on that.
Let's do
You
it.
can vote on parliamentary type things, but you can't vote to amend the agenda, for example.
Like, we couldn't put a different policy in here, but it's the policy that we're on.
You could take 10 minutes if you wanted it.
Well, it's already
7 o'clock.
7:01.
We're
So
now-
then according to what I heard, we have to end the meeting. And then does that mean this goes away? This dies because we don't have consensus to move forward or to move to the next policy session?
At 6:59, I made a motion to recess for 10 minutes.
Yes. Yes, you did.
Had a minute
I
to spare.
seconded
Okay,
So
so,
there we go.
for parliamentary
There
procedures.
you go.
all right, so so is there discussion then? It's been moved and seconded. I guess my question is, what would we do in this 10-minute recess?
Well, if you were going to construct what you wanted to put forward, we might move forward to put it on the board.
Does that need to be done in public, though?
No, because that would happen, would show up on the agenda.
The subject that's on the agenda, it's perfectly acceptable to talk about that subject.
During recess?
No, is that what you're talking about? No.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, because that's to be done in public.
No.
It has to be done in public.
Yeah.
So we'll recess till, oh wait, been moved and seconded. Further discussion, questions?
I don't know why we're recessing.
I don't know either, but it's the motion on the floor. Other discussion?
Well, I'm just pointing out, you were talking about taking time to construct something that met the needs of the hour.
Yep.
If at the end of that time, we have a general consensus, that would allow us to say, it therefore goes forward to the board, regular meeting.
I hear that, but technically since it's 7:02 and it's past the time, we can't.
10 minutes once you trigger it, you
Yeah.
haven't triggered it yet.
Okay. I don't know if that's necessarily correct, but I'm willing to do what's the motion on the floor. So other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of taking a 10-minute recess, raise your right hand and say aye. Aye. All opposed, no, there's none. So motion carries. We'll take a recess for 10 minutes, come back at 7:13. All right, it's 7:14. And I'm a mess. And we're calling this meeting, the special meeting, back in session. So continuing on for 4220, I just kind of want to know procedurally, I'm going to ask Mr. Brockvogel what kind of we're able to do since it's now 7:14. We moved to have a break, so now what?
So I looked it up. The question is whether we gave proper notice to the public so they could attend. We did. The emphasis really on special meetings is about the notice because of the shortened time. And I think we're in compliance, so recess is in compliance. Anything you do now is in compliance. And-
Including extending the meeting, et cetera, if we need to.
And you, oh, I'm sorry, thanks, man. So Ms. Holly and I went back and added those 3 items, and I think you have a printed copy of it. And it started with the provided however.
May I make a suggestion
Yes.
for the board to consider? In the last sentence, the last 4 words of the first paragraph, sorry.
Yep.
The words "from by the board directly" would change it to the words "under the board's oversight."
I would be down for that.
Where are you at?
And
First
so-
paragraph.
The first paragraph.
Oh, the
last
first
4
paragraph.
First paragraph,
Oh.
last 4 words.
I thought you said the last paragraph, thank you,
So
okay.
by the board directly, change it to "under the board's oversight."
Now,
I
I
like
would just, I'm agnostic about that, but I would remind the board again that Director Clark has a good point. There is a process in the contract that you've agreed to. So however we do that, we have to be cognizant of the contractual rights and duties we have.
But that wording doesn't work for both, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
So what were you
I think
going,
that takes a nod to that this is something given to us not by 4220, that this is given to the authority of the board by its existence and,
By virtue of the board's power under state law or something.
yes,
Of our oversight,
yes.
or whatever we want to call it.
so give me the word Smith exact.
I suggested changing the last 4 words from "by the board directly" to "under the board's oversight."
Thank you.
And everything else are the things that we had discussed, correct?
Yep, those
Just those 3 items.
Yep.
The rest I'm fine with.
I'm okay with moving forward.
I'm fine with moving forward and seeing it. And I appreciate doing this.
Yep.
I know that this goes into,
And I want to point out a correction that needs to be made. It should say parents or guardians of students, not
Yep.
or students.
okay,
That
thank you,
was
sorry.
quick typing incorrectly.
And I do want to say, someone sent me a copy of North Shore's because they're viewing us while we're talking about this, when we said that other districts don't do this. Apparently North Shore has it in their policy 4220. Complaints received by the board or a board member shall be referred to the superintendent designee, except that complaints against the superintendent shall be handled by the board directly. So it's very similar language. So Shoreline, or not Shoreline, North Shore has it in their policy apparently.
I
So-
appreciate that,
Oh,
thank
yeah,
you.
of course, yeah. Well, that wasn't me, that was the public, so public is
Thank you.
watching, so
Well,
thank you,
I
public.
appreciate you bringing it
Oh,
up.
of course, yeah, of course.
I'm good with this.
Moving it forward to policy and moving it forward to vote on,
I'm okay with it going forward, but I'm not saying that I will support it.
that's all we need to hear is whether it's a consensus to move it to our next meeting, the 25th or not,
Dr. Hamada?
The board meeting,
board meeting.
just want to clarify that.
On the 25th,
Regular board meeting.
regular board meeting.
October 25th.
2023.
2023
Yeah, I'm,
even.
hey,
Just to
you know.
clarify for the record, we're not voting to move anything, we're just talking.
We're just
Yeah,
talking,
Consensus to move
Yeah.
it forward.
There's
Talking in
consensus to move it
general,
forward.
I say we need to do a fist of 5. That's my way of consensus building, but that's a whole other discussion for consensus building. Not like that. Other discussion?
I'd just like to thank my board members for the cordiality tonight and
Yeah.
working together.
There's no reason for hostility or anything. We all have opinions. We'll bring them forward, and I really do appreciate hearing my colleagues' opinions and thoughts. So,
And I thought
Thank
it
you.
was
I do too.
yeah. And I appreciate the staff for, I'm gonna go slower now, Director Clark. No, I really do appreciate the staff taking the time to write this up and staying extra time, so appreciate it. So without anything else, I'm gonna call the meeting. I'm gonna adjourn the meeting, this special meeting at 7:19. Thank you.
Thank you.